The Housing Assistance Council is a national nonprofit that supports affordable housing efforts throughout rural America. Since 1971, HAC has provided below market financing for affordable housing and community development, technical assistance and training, research and information, and policy formulation to enable solutions for rural communities. Need funding assistance to support or help meet the affordable housing needs of veterans in rural places? Thank you for attending our open forum to discuss HAC's current RFP for its Affordable Housing for Rural Veterans Initiative, AHRV. Today's discussion will include a high-level overview of the RFP and a walkthrough of frequently asked questions, along with an opportunity to pose questions directly to program staff. Don't forget that applications are due on January 21st, 2022, so get organized and come prepared with your probing questions in hand. Funding is limited and the application process is extremely competitive. Thank you to the Home Depot Foundation for sponsoring today's webinar and HAC's Affordable Housing for Rural Veterans Grant Program. Before we get started, I'm pleased to be able to introduce today's speakers, Shantiria Charleston and Anselmo Tellez. Shantiria oversees HAC's Training and Technical Assistance Division. This includes managing HAC special programs, to include its Rural Community Development Initiative, RCDI, Affordable Housing for Rural Veterans Initiative, AHRV, the Native American and Alaska Native Initiative, and broad oversight and coordination of its training activities to include the Rural Housing Conference. Prior to this position, Shantiria served as HAC's AHRV and RCDI Program and Training Manager, providing program oversight of HAC's Rural Veterans Initiative, its Rural Community Development Initiative, and training activities, as well as providing technical assistance on organizational capacity building, nonprofit governance, management, development, strategic planning, and transformation related to an array of programs including home, single-family housing development, and HUD Section 202-811 supportive housing programs. Shantiria is a veteran of the United States Armed Forces Army Active Component. She holds a master's degree from Central Michigan University, a bachelor's degree from St. Leo University, is a Georgia Military College graduate alumna, a HUD Home Program Regulation certified, and is recognized as a HUD Energy Champion. Anselmo Tellez has over 28 years of service with HAC. He has experience working with single-family, multifamily, farm labor, and subdivision developments. He coordinates loan fund information, services, and products throughout the Southwest region. Anselmo has assisted nonprofit organizations throughout the region to build organizational capacity and project development expertise in HUD, including home and USDA Rural Development Housing programs. He also assists in the coordination of HAC's Colonia and loan fund initiatives and products specifically targeted to groups serving Colonia residents. Anselmo has received home program certification regulations.
All right, all right. So good afternoon and happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. It is a grant funding opportunity for HAC's Affordable Housing for Rural Veterans Initiative. I am Shantiria Charleston, and as Stephanie mentioned, I am the Director of Technical Assistance and Training here at the Housing Assistance Council, and I am joined by Anselmo Tellez, Senior Housing Specialist and HAC's AHRV Program Manager. And together, we will be walking you through today's presentation of the application and RFP guidelines. We're going to go ahead and dive right in. So, what is the Affordable Housing for Rural Veterans Initiative, or what we affectionately refer to as AHRV? And so AHRV is an initiative that's supported and funded by our generous sponsor, the Home Depot Foundation, with the intent of supporting the development and modification and or repair of housing for veterans across rural America. So, as I said, we're digging right in. We'll start by covering some general information, and this is going to all be straightforward and quick before we turn it over to Anselmo, who's going to dig in deeply. And so I'll briefly touch on the program purposes, the types of activities, and the maximum grant awards. And so again, the purpose of HAC's AHRV program is to support and help to meet the needs, the affordable housing needs of veterans in rural areas. And so there's a couple different types of projects that we're looking at, or the specific type of project, really, what we're looking at. The program is intended to support brick and mortar projects. And so that those projects would be either providing temporary and or permanent housing for veterans. And again, this is going to depend on the needs of the local community. Typical projects also include homeowner modification and or rehabilitation, new construction or modification and or rehabilitation to veteran homeless shelter or transitional facilities. So the maximum grant award, and this is going to get pretty interesting. So pay close attention, but Anselmo's going to cover this again. We're going to try and, nail this a few times this afternoon. The typical, and a key word here is typical, the typical maximum grant award per nonprofit organization is $30,000. However, depending on the severity of need or the criticality, if that's a word, of the repairs or the work being done, we have some flexibility in terms of the maximum amounts. So if the need is great or the project has a scarcity of resources, please submit the fuller request and we will review as necessary. And so we have a little bit of leeway or a little bit of leverage to move around the maximum grant awards. There is no minimum on the amount an organization can receive. Um, you can only, as an organization, submit one grant. However, funds can be used on scattered sites across an entire area, depending on the location of the veteran housing units to be served. Eligible uses. So, all right. So, the grant funds can be used for a variety of activities. The program, again, is intended to be flexible to allow groups to respond to the specific needs of their communities. Uses range from general development to rehabilitation, and this might include homeowner repair, home ownership, multifamily rental development and preservation, and housing for homeless veterans. HAC's program places a special emphasis on projects that address housing for those veterans that are aging in place and those veterans that are homeless. But I do want to stress one caveat is that while the program funding is really flexible, supporting project management or administrative activities, they are ineligible costs unless the nonprofit is acting as the project's general contractor. And then again, and Selma will be covering a little bit more about this in his presentation. Um, let's see. I think I've talked about the range of uses. The grant term. So as the slide says, the typical grant term is 1 year. And so we are really looking for projects that will either be complete or substantially complete within 12 months from the date of funding. And so if you think about the date of funding, it's really going to be the date by which you execute the contract. There's going to be a small window from where grantees are notified that they have been awarded, and then we'll generate the contract. And then, there's a small window for our finance department to figure out and get all the funding processed and out the door. But the 12-month clock starts at contract signing. Let's talk a little bit about the units. So the units that are actually being built or preserved, rehabbed or modified, must be for low income veterans as defined by the Department of Veteran Affairs. They must be in rural areas. And so the term low income is defined as income that does not exceed 80% of the median income for a specific area. And so if you have projects that are going to be built in Bogalusa, Louisiana, then you would use the AMI for that area versus using it for, say, maybe a place, Statesboro, Georgia. It's not a national AMI that we're using. We're using it specific to the place where the units will actually be developed or rehabbed and modified. So if we move to look at, let's see, I'm getting ahead of myself there with the clicker. So if we want to talk a little bit more about determining if a veteran meets the income qualifications guidelines, HAC allows nonprofits to use either the annual income as defined by 24 CFR 5.609, which is typically all income that's earned by members of that household. The specifics of which can be found in a link that we're going to include as part of the materials. We'll make sure that Stephanie includes that links for you guys. Um, the other option outside of annual income is that you are allowed to use the adjusted gross income. And that adjusted gross income is defined for purposes of reporting under IRS Form 1040 series for individual federal annual income tax purposes. And so groups should really take a good look at which method works best for their veterans that they're going to serve, because whichever method a group chooses to utilize, it must be used as a standard across all the units and or veterans that are being assisted with the AHRV funds if awarded. Let's see. In addition to for the purpose of HAC's AHRV program, let's talk a little bit about how we define a veteran. And so I mentioned that a little bit earlier in terms of who qualifies as a veteran. HAC defines a veteran as a person who served in the active military, naval, or air, and who was discharged or released under conditions other than dishonorable. And that is actually the definition that's provided by the Department of Veteran Affairs. Also, further authority for determining veteran status is provided in 38 USC 101, Section 2, whereas a reservist or a member of the National Guard who was called to federal active duty or disabled from a disease or injury that incurred or was aggravated in the line of duty or while in training status also qualifies as a veteran. So, we can answer more questions about that in the Q&A portion, or if you wanted to reach out to us directly with a specific scenario in terms of determining veteran eligibility, we're happy to take those emails or those inquiries and get back to you. A little bit about the cost or how funds can be used. Funds must go to costs that are related, specifically related to hard costs, and those are the development costs for development or rehab and or modification. Some allowable expenses might include construction costs, or again, it says soft costs here on the screen, but the soft costs are really going to be those costs that the nonprofit incurs as a result of acting as the general contractor. And again, if we have questions on the particular soft costs or whatnot, we can answer those questions at the end in the Q&A section. And then again, we can also take the inquiries via email after the call is ended, so that we might jump on a quick call with you guys to discuss if you have specific questions relative to a specific scenario. I think I covered the ineligible activities before. Again, while it's extremely flexible, the funding is extremely flexible. Project management or administrative activities, they're not eligible costs. Again, unless acting as the general contractor. And one example of administrative costs would just be you have your person that processes the timesheets for the team that is doing the rehab for your rehab team or whatnot. Those costs are ineligible. We typically don't see a lot of those requests come in, but want to make sure that, it is understood that this is specifically a bricks and mortar program. I will at this point turn it over to Anselmo, who's going to take you guys on a really deep dive of the remainder of the information, and then we'll come back at the end of the Q&A and we'll get into some discussions. Anselmo?
Thank you, Terry. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so we really appreciate you all joining us today. It gives us an opportunity to kind of clarify things that we've seen in the past. And so the way we're going to process your application is we're going to score it. And right off the top, what we're going to look for is your application complete? Right. If you checked off that you submitted your exhibits, then and they're not present in the email, then your application will be incomplete, and we will not be processing your application any further. You will not have passed threshold requirements, and will not be able to go on to our underwriting process. So I wanted to cover a few of the things that we're going to be looking at so you'll know how we're going to be scoring your application. So we're going to be looking at organizational capacity, and I'll be covering each one of these in greater detail. But we're going to be looking at your organization, your staffing, your finances, your experience, and to determine if you're going to be successfully be able to complete your proposed project. And remember, you're proposing the project. We're going to be looking at your proposed use of funds, and I want to go into greater detail. So I'm just going to move on to the next one, and I'll cover this in a little bit. And I think really important is we're going to be looking at the need for funds. We get so many scenarios. We have organizations that have great capacity and some that have very little capacity. And then we look at who they're wanting to serve and whether those veterans have limited income or actually have repayment ability in the case of maybe home ownership. And so we'll be looking at the critical need for funds. And then we'll also be looking at your project outcomes and what you proposed in the beginning, how many veterans were served, did you serve minority population, did you serve women-headed households? We're going to be looking at those demographics. Did you serve handicapped, disabled? Organizational capacity. Again, we're looking at minimum levels of capacity, and you will demonstrate that through your financial statements, through your administrative funding support, if you have policies, rehab policies, and then the oversight and composition of your board. And so when we look at your financial statements, it'll tell us a lot. So if we ask you to submit an audited financial statement and an organizational budget, and we have the time period, we'll be looking at those to see, do you have the administrative capacity to complete the project? Remember, Terry said this is pretty much a bricks and mortar. And so administrative costs as minimum as possible will be approved, and unless working in the capacity of a contractor. So we'll be analyzing all those documents to determine, is your project goal realistic based on your organizational capacity and time constraints. And I want to add that in previous rounds, COVID and the pandemic have affected everybody. And so it affected materials, it affected the ability for crews to get on site, it affected so many aspects of development. So when you propose your project for this 2020 round, a lot of those factors are known. So we just ask that you take those into consideration when determining the scope of your project and the time that's going to be required. Remember, you must complete the project within 12 months of signing the grant agreement. And again, like, we'll be looking at staffing, and we're also going to be looking at, do you have strategic partners? Do you have access to volunteer workforce? Are you working with local veterans groups to identify veterans in need of repairs? So we'll be looking at all of that. And then, of course, your mission and your housing development experience. In the application, we ask you to provide information on your housing experience. How many units have you developed? How many have you developed in the last year? How many have you developed in the last 5 years? And how many are related to the veterans? And how long have you been serving rural veterans? And then we have the proposed use of funds and the need for funds. As I mentioned earlier, these are going to be really, really important in how we score your application. So we want you to clearly outline your project to be funded. We want you to give us a description and illustrate how the proposed activity will help the organization increase veterans housing development and lead to more sustainable rural veterans housing programs. But more importantly, how are you impacting the lives of veterans? You know, are you providing them a warm and dry space where they didn't have it before? Are you providing them accessibility where they didn't have it before? So how did you impact? Did you increase their usable income by providing an HVAC unit, for instance, and now their utility bills are lower? So we'll be looking at the kinds of impact that you're proposing. So that now proposed use of funds, as Terry said, support brick and mortar and that serve low income, elderly or disabled veterans. Okay, and I underline these. I know I underlined them more than once. Critical home repair and rehab needs. We're really focusing on these types of repairs, and I'll explain a little bit more of that in a little bit. And we want to support homeless veterans as well, and help veterans become homeowners and secure affordable rental housing. Homeownership is a little bit, when we look at scoring homeownership proposals, we look at the veterans being served. If you're doing homeownership, it probably says that the veteran has some level of repayment ability. And when we funded homeownership projects, it's usually because we've had a multiple of funding sources that either provide the housing unit when it's complete at no cost to the veteran or very little cost to the veteran. When we're looking at offsetting costs and reducing the cost of mortgages, then we have to take into consideration the rates and the terms, and that gets a little bit more complicated because at the end of the day, the impact may be that we're saving $27 a month versus being able to provide a home at no cost with other funding perhaps at no cost to a veteran. So the homeownership proposals, we really look at those and we really dig down into rates and terms and what's the affordability impact to the homeowner. Project budget. In the proposal, in the application, we ask you for organizational budget, right? But we also ask you for a project budget. And when you have when you write up your narrative on what you propose to do, your project budget should reflect that. You'd be surprised how many times we don't find a connection between what the applicant is telling us is the proposed budget, and then the development budget. It doesn't really reflect that, or doesn't give us enough information or breakdown to say, well, they said they were going to do this, but the budget doesn't reflect that. So be sure that those two support each other. So and then how you are proposing to do the development. Are you taking applications? Are you doing write-ups? And then are you going out and getting contractors to do the work? Or do you have an in-house crew that can do the work and then you act in the capacity of a general contractor? In that case, we're gonna look at you, and when you get estimates from contractors, of course they're gonna have labor and materials. We don't expect anything different if you're working in the capacity of a general contractor, but they must be reasonable, and and we're going to ask you to for you to document or at least tell us how you do that, how you're going to do that. Are you going to do the write-ups? Are you going to do estimates? Do you have contractors that you normally work with? So anything that'll help us understand what your proposal or what you're proposing will be very, very helpful. And then, like I said, the project narrative should be complete, correspond to everything in the application. And like I talked about before, what is the impact of your program in assisting first the veteran, and then the community, and then the program, and sustainability and economic security for the veteran. Okay, before I go into the due dates, I had made some side notes that I really wanted to cover. And that is, as Terry said, the program emphasis is critical repairs. And I wanted to give you some examples of that because we get questions, is this acceptable in Ensemble? Can we do this? And I just wanted to give you some examples up front. For instance, critical repairs would be something like ADA modifications, accessibility, addressing health and safety issues, providing a weather-tight environment, maybe replacing a septic system, any kind of weatherization that reduces heating and cooling impact on the family's budget. Roofs, of course, like I said, ADA ramps, and please, if you have any questions about, would this be eligible under the program, send us an email. We'll be happy to respond to you and or give you a call and say this is normally not what we do, or yes, this is acceptable. When we look at being flexible in the program and how we score things, we want to look at what is the need for the funds, and we're gonna look at those critical types of repairs and see, okay, those would qualify as critical needs. How do you plan to use the funds? What is the availability of other funds? All right, because sometimes, although HAC doesn't require a match for AHRV, some folks say, hey, we've got state money, we've got home money, we got CHOTA money, we've got other sources of money, and we're going to be combining resources. When you do that in your budget, please show that. Please show which funds for what purposes. And then I also wanted to say that sometimes I've seen, and we've seen in our review after the fact, where you have additional funding sources that the critical repairs were done with other funds. And then we see things like, painting or other non-critical types of items that are included in the AHRV funds. So when you're looking at that, please address all the critical needs as much as possible with the AHRV funds. And then if there's other things like, literally we've seen this, paint to storage shed, or provide repairs to a garage, do that with other funds. And then, so that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of critical repairs. If you're looking at, just think about heated space, living space, and improving those areas. So, okay. I wanted to talk a little bit more about administrative costs and acting in the capacity of a contractor. When you act in the capacity of a contractor, we want you to be able to cover materials, your internal crews, pay for subcontract labor and materials. In those soft costs might be permits, inspection fees, maybe even some equipment rental. Maybe in the installation of a septic system, you need to rent a backhoe or a trenching equipment. So so those are the kinds of things that we're kind of be looking at. Then we didn't put it in the presentation today, but in our application we provide on page 5 a link to the USDA website so that you can identify a property of a veteran, and you can input that address in that link, and it will pull up a rural certification. In other words, it says this property is located in a rural area. And that's the whole emphasis of the program, affordable housing for rural veterans. So if you have properties identified, please provide them up front. If you are operating in a rural, normally your service area is rural, then tell us the county, and and then that veterans will be identified within a certain, or that you have a waiting list of families ready to go. So, all right, I wanted to get that in there because I felt it was important to kind of provide that information up front. So we're accepting the application. We have the Word and the PDF version up on our website. And so at the end of the day, if you can provide all the documentation in a PDF format, or even if you can't, please try to submit it in one email. I realize sometimes the size of the document may not make that possible, but when you submit it, if that's the case, then submit it to email, and please sure to label it 1 of 2 and 2 of 2, so that we can track that and know that they're related, and that there's 2 parts to that application. Like I said before, and Terry said before, incomplete applications will not meet threshold requirement. So please be sure that it's complete. Deadline is January 21st. I broke it down here. We want to be sure there's no misunderstanding about what time to submit, right? Depending on your time zone. And if you need more information, we have our website information there. So now tips for completing the application. So Terry, feel free to add any more comments. But, and again, we did this intentionally. Incomplete applications will not be reviewed. All right. And we're not going to be able to submit updates after the due date. The application is available in the Word format and PDF, and all additional kind of exhibits that you want to submit. If you can do them in PDF, that would be great. Okay, this may sound really complete and answer the section. You'll be surprised how many applications we see that don't have any information in some of the sections, or they don't elaborate enough. So just please just be sure that every section is complete, and that there's an answer in there.
And Selma, if I could really quick,
Yeah.
while you are preparing for the next bullet, want to remind folks that the way to submit your questions to receive on-the-spot answers today is to use the Q&A feature that's at the top of the screen. Just click on it, and I think that it's the second icon next to the two heads there, or the one on the opposite side of the raise the hand feature there. If you would, just please go ahead and start entering your questions into that field. We will start pulling those up for immediate response. Thank you.
It's the chat bubble with the question mark.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so if in your application you checked those items that were required exhibits, please be sure that the grant writer and whoever's putting together the proposal includes all of those exhibits in your final submittal. We've had instances where that item was checked, but it was not included as part of the submittal. So just be sure that the folks are coordinating and that, you know, everything that's checked is included in that submittal email. And we've had applications that were submitted without a signature. So please be sure that the authorized representative, and sometimes because we have a lot of grant writers that are submitting on behalf of the organizations, we want to be sure that we get the signatures from the executive director or whoever would be the authorized representative. And then, of course, the AHRV program is for nonprofits. And so we want your IRS determination letter as a 501c3, 501c4, or designation, and certificate of good standing. Your current, and again, these are part of your required exhibits, so we wanted to bring them up again and remind you. Your current operating budget, year-to-date actuals, at least through July 30th of 2021. Your most recent audited financial statements. We've had applicants submit both their audited financial statement and their 990. That's great. If you don't have your audited financial statement and your operating budget is less than $750,000, then please submit your 990, your IRS 990. But in any case, if you could submit both, that would be great too. And then the list of board members. We like to see who's on your board. When we think about nonprofits, we want to know, are you broad-based? You know, what does your board look like? What is the diversity composition? What backgrounds do they have? Do you have teachers? Do you have folks that represent? Do you have veterans, right? Or veterans organizations? Though that's not required, but we want to know a little bit more about how your organization board is comprised. And then again, your proposed program and your project budget, and that's separate from your operating budget. We don't have many multifamily proposals, but if your project does involve, we want some assurances in terms of occupancy and that you're going to be making those units available to veterans. I might say here we have funded transitional housing for veterans. In those cases, we had multiple funding sources. And AHRV funds were used to finance a particular part of that development. One of the things that we always have to consider is when you have larger multifamily developments, are the projects going to be complete in the 12-month period that we're asking projects to be complete? Sometimes we will get, oh, I forgot to submit this, and we don't mind doing that from time to time, but once we start getting 40 and 50 applicants, it's hard to keep track. So we're going to ask you if you find out that you didn't submit something in your application, please let us know, but resubmit the entire application with the revision, and we're happy to substitute out your proposal rather than go in and try to amend it. And here's just some demographic information. Some of the questions on the application are, you know, what geographic regions do you serve? And so this is just kind of giving you an idea of what we look at in terms of the Northeast, the Southwest, what we consider Midwest, the Southwest, and the West. And then our high need areas. And these are HAC determined high needs areas, you know, Appalachia, Indian Country, Mississippi Delta, the Southwest border, Colonia, or not applicable. But please answer and circle one of those, or all those that apply. I'm sorry. Right, and then underserved populations would be African American, farm workers, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, and then we want to know if you have a Home Depot connection, and this is fine too. But if you have had funding from the Home Depot or the Home Depot Foundation, please let us know what that was, what that relationship was, and what project was. All right, it's time for Q&A.
All right, all right. Good job, Anselmo. We've got a few questions here that I've already published to the Q&A. I'm just going to read them off, Anselmo, and then if you'll respond, and if there's anything additional to add, I'll do so. But I'm just going to read them off here so that everybody can hear it. If those folks, for those folks that are not able to see the pane, could you please review who are eligible applicants?
Okay, well, our eligible applicants will be 501c3s, 501c4s, tribal housing entities. We have had inquiries from limited partnerships and for-profit organizations. Those are not going to be eligible entities. However, it doesn't mean that a limited profit or a for-profit organization cannot partner with a nonprofit organization, maybe to provide services or to provide products. So, but basically we're looking at nonprofit 501c3s, 501c4s, and tribal housing entities.
All right. Can you elaborate on the income requirements for potential clients? Annual income, are you looking at gross only? AMI could be a very different number depending which method do you prefer. Anselmo, do you mind if I start out on this and then you can sort of round it out?
No, not at all. Yeah,
All right.
this has come up many times. Yeah.
All right,
Absolutely.
all right, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the question, Tammy. We, as Anselmo just said, we have had a lot of discussion on the topic. It's really not based on the which method HAC prefers. It's going to be based on your organization and how the veterans that are coming into your organization for assistance, what method best works for them. However, we would caution you that if you are going to do more than one unit, you sort of look at it, you look at it holistically to figure out which method is going to work best across the group of veterans that you're going to serve. Annual income, again, you know, we are using the annual income as defined by 24 CFR, and that really is income that's earned by all members of the household. We are strictly sticking to the definition that's used under 24 CFR 5.609. And then you also too have the adjusted gross income, which tends to, from what we've seen from a lot of our previous grantees, the adjusted gross income tends to work a little bit better for veterans in that it sort of takes into account the way that some veterans receive disability compensation and the sort. But this may or may not answer your question. But again, as we've said earlier in the presentation, if you want to follow up with an email on a specific scenario, because it might be something very specific to your situation, we can respond to that. And if there's a need to kind of, you know, even if after that email, once we read it, we'll give you a quick call and sort of, you know, go through and figure out how we can best advise you. But you want to make sure that you do that in advance of the due date, because once the applications are submitted, as Anselmo said earlier, there is no opportunity for revisions after the due date is passed. Anselmo, did you want to respond to that as well, or add anything to that?
No. Thank you, Terry. We've really seen this situation come up when folks tell us that the disabled veteran is receiving disability and they don't claim it on their income tax. But yet if you go the 80% of median income, you might want to include that. So depending on the situation, you may want, in that particular case, you may want to use the 1040 route. So, but please let us know. We'll be, like Terry says, we'll be happy to advise you up front.
All right, thank you. There's a question. Yes.
If I can really quickly do a housekeeping, we can see all the questions that are coming in. Terry is publishing them as she's getting ready to respond to them. So if you don't see your question yet, it's in the queue and Terry's taking a look at it. And just remind everybody that if you hit that little icon with the chat bubble and the question mark, that'll go to Terry and Terry will do a kind of a review and publish.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate that. Stephanie's so good. So I think this is Catherine, if I'm not correct, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have to have a predetermined home address to apply, or can we designate a larger area, such as a county, where we will identify a potential veteran? I immediately have a response to that, but Anselmo is leading the responses today. So Anselmo, if you want to go ahead and take that one.
Oh, no, absolutely, but please chime in. No, you don't have to have identified the veteran properties at the time of application, but we do want information about your service area and historically who you have served, and if your service area has always been rural, and that's historically what you've served, so the families that you identify are going to come from those rural communities, then you may want to tell us we have relationships with the local veterans organizations, and we go to them for referrals, or we have a waiting list, or we have veterans that need the assistance. Now we've only identified half of them, but we will identify the other half, once we know if we were successful in our grant application. So, Terry, anything else?
I actually want to issue a very helpful tip here that Catherine, you might find helpful, and other folks on the call might find helpful as well. When you think about submission, or think about the information that you submit as part of your application, just remember that this is going to be a super competitive process. And so quite naturally, if this is a 12-month program and we're looking for nonprofits that are going to have things complete or substantially complete within those 12 months, we're really going to be looking, for lack of a better term, and this is not applicable in this case, or it might be, those projects that are really shovel ready. And so I would say, think about, the competitiveness of the program. If you are at all able to identify some, potential participants for your program, I would do that. You will meet the eligibility criteria if you submit that wide area, designation. But I will reiterate, and I cannot stress enough, it is a truly, truly competitive process. And so hopefully that might be a useful tip for you.
Thank you, Terry. No, that was a really good tip. Absolutely.
Let's see. There is a question here. All right, I am going to publish that question. I hope it comes over. Okay, so hard costs, Anselmo. Hard costs equal material and labor, and soft costs equals write-up and estimates and fees and equipment rental. Warm is our own GC. Can we charge the cost of processing applications to qualify a veteran for AHRV?
Yes. Remember, yes, you're acting in the capacity of a contractor, but yet you're still the nonprofit. So in that particular case, that would be soft costs. We would look at the reasonableness of that. Okay. So I don't know how else to maybe elaborate more, but everything that was mentioned in the question, those are eligible. And in that particular case, yeah, we understand that going out, doing inspections, doing the write-ups, that's an important part of the process.
All right. We do have a few folks with their hand raised. We are going to answer these other, like I think there's 3 questions in the queue, and then we're going to move to the folks that have their hands raised. Let's see. The next question is along the same lines. Anselmo, are required fees such as permit fees eligible expenses in cases when the nonprofit is not the general contractor?
Yeah, I would say yes, because again, it's all it's a necessary part of the process, and you got to get the permits. You're not gonna, I mean, you got to have the permits, and in some cases you even pay for inspections. So yes, absolutely.
All right. Let's see. Let me get this question here. Published. Carol, let me get Carol published first. And then, so Carol's question is the $30,000 per agency or per county?
No, the $30,000 is for the project, and the applicant will determine the scope of that project. And I think economies of scale will come into play. One organization may propose to do 10 units at $3,000 average, and then we're going to look at that. Or some organization may propose to do, I'm sorry, did I say 10? 10 at 3, or some may propose 3 units at $10,000 assistance to each eligible veteran. So we're going to be looking at the total project total of 30,000 plus or minus, depending on the critical need. We want, again, to emphasize that we want to have as much flexibility, and so we will be looking at the proposals, and we will we may elect to award less than the requested amount, and in some cases we may actually maybe award a little bit more depending on the critical need for funds, the repayment ability of the veteran. We take all those things into consideration. Okay, but it's not per county, and it's not per and basically it's not really, well, it is for organization, but it's basically to address what the proposed project is.
All
I hope
right.
that answers the question.
Yeah. If not, Carol, please, please send us an email and follow up with us if that does not answer the question. We are, readily standing by to be responsive to your questions. There's another question that's in from Sarah. Are there restrictions on construction projects? Can funds be used to build a tiny home on a trailer for homeless veterans? Some grants restrict tiny homes and or mobile units. Um, I'll push to Anselmo, but I do want to respond here and say it is really going to be on a case by case basis, depending upon what that particular project looks like. But I'll push over to Anselmo now so that he can respond.
Okay, no, thank you, Terry. So we've had a few instances where we've approved funds for a tiny home, but it was a pilot. It was a pilot, and we needed to have a lot of information about that tiny home. The tiny home was not going to be mobile. It was going to be on a permanent foundation, and so I would say, again, this is a very, very competitive process. We have had a number of interesting concepts come to us, including like modular additions to a unit. In that case, we were looking at something that might be permanently affixed to an existing structure to provide greater accessibility, modifications, AADA modifications. So like Terry said, we really would have to know more information about how you propose to use this tiny home and what need you are meeting and what the existing housing conditions are that make this a viable kind of alternative. So anything else, Terry?
Nope, thank you, Anselmo. Next up, we have a question from Kelly, and she says, we serve multiple counties through our weatherization program. Could we apply for more than $30,000? It was stated that 30,000 was the max. I like that question. Go ahead, Anselmo.
Okay. I love it. I like the question. Go ahead, Anselmo. I love that. I love that. So, this is interesting. And like Terry said at the top of the presentation today, we want to be as flexible as possible. And so we recognize that sometimes, if we had additional funds, what could we do with them? So we want to always be asking that question. And if we see a proposal that says, we serve multiple counties, the drive time back and forth is significant. It adds more costs. Maybe the ruralness or the rural nature of the project site, the ability to get subcontractors, materials, whatever the situation is. In that particular case, I would say, let us know and give us an opportunity to say, maybe we can fund more than 30 for this proposal. But, we're kind of looking at 30 as the average, but we want to give ourselves flexibility, and we want to give you the opportunity to maybe say, if we had another 3,000, if we had another 5,000, whatever that amount might be, we might be able to do this or even extend our services to here. So let us know what that additional money would do, so that we will have some idea of what the critical need or what the use of funds is.
All right, thanks, Anselmo. We are 2 minutes away from the top of the hour. We've got one more question that's in the Q&A, and then we've got a couple of hands raised, Anselmo. So we want to kind of maybe make sure that we can at least give an opportunity for those folks that have their hand raised, at least for half of them, to maybe ask their question. So let's first address Becky's question here. And Becky wants to know, are critical home repairs on mobile homes eligible owned by veterans?
Okay. I think in this particular case, is the mobile home on a permanent foundation, right? Is it on property owned by the veteran? You need to let us know the situation so that we can make some determination. Is it a leased lot situation? What's the term of the lease? We don't want a situation where the lot price goes up and then the mobile home has to be moved because you can't afford the site anymore. So, but mobile homes are not ineligible. They are eligible, but we want to see them on a fixed foundation, or at least placed on a permanent foundation with funds. And then also we want to know whether that lot is owned by the veteran or not, or at least what the situation might be.
All right. Thank you for that. And so, Stephanie, it looks like first up we have Agatha Davidson, who has her hand raised. And if we are okay to give Agatha microphone access. Agatha, are you there?
She's already live.
Yes, I am. Thank you. The Q&A didn't pop up for me for some reason. My question is if funds are eligible for widows of veterans.
That question, Agatha, has come up at least 10 times in the last year. And so, unfortunately, because it is a program intended for veterans, a widow does not qualify under the definition of what a veteran, the definition of veteran that we're using for the purposes of this program. But Agatha, if you would please follow up with Anselmo and I offline with an email. We want to reach out to you to just give you a bit more information if that's possible.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Agatha. We appreciate the question. Wendy Knox is up next.
Hi, I'm in the same boat. I couldn't get the chat to come up. What if we have already broken ground, already started a project of we're specifically doing a veterans build home, and we're just looking for some additional funding for this project? Is that something that would qualify?
Yes, absolutely.
No, totally. I
And so
agree.
I was going to say, Anselmo wants to say something. I can hear it.
Oh, no, absolutely. It's like, oh yeah, that's a total yes. Again, what we're looking at is, will the project be complete in a 12-month period? And then let us know what other funding you have in place and what this gap is going to do in terms of maybe completing the project. Absolutely. And then what is the affordability impact on the veteran?
Great.
Right. So yeah, those would all be great. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Wendy. Next up, Diane, we're a little bit over the hour, but I want to try and get to as many questions as we can. We're going to stop at 3:05, but Diane, if you're ready, and then Rebecca is followed by Robert. Diane?
Can you hear me?
Yes, there's a slight echo, but we can hear you.
What to do?
All right, one moment, Diane. We're trying to get you unmuted again.
Diane, can you hit the unmute button on your screen? If there's
have.
a little echo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Is this reimbursements?
That's a great question, Diane. Typically, we do two disbursements on the program. It is 80% upfront at contract signing, and then the remaining 20% is done on a reimbursable basis once the project is complete and all of the reporting and final documentation has been submitted that verifies all of the expenses and so forth. Anselmo, did I get that right?
No, absolutely. And I just want to just give a quick example, and that is, if a grantee receives an award of $30,000, we will disperse $24,000 up front, and then so that enables the organization to use those monies, but then they must submit receipts for $30,000 in services, repairs, etc. So then that way we will say total repairs $30,000, initial disbursement $24,000, reimburse this organization the balance of $6,000 due to them.
All right, perfect. Up next is Rebecca from out at Clinch Powell. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. I didn't have the chat box either, but thank you for this opportunity. So we do both repair, but we also do housing counseling that could possibly help the homeless and low-income vets become homeowners or get them into rental. Would these funds cover if that's all we did, if we didn't do any type of rehab, but only focused our energy on helping folks get into housing? Would that be eligible?
Anselmo, I'll let you answer. I don't want to do just a quick and dirty on it, but I'll ask you to respond to that, Anselmo.
Sure. Although we understand, the importance of counseling and preparing folks for home ownership opportunities, the AHRV grant is more focused on the bricks and mortar, the construction side of it. And so I would say strictly counseling would probably be a no. Maybe some minimal counseling in the process of qualifying a borrower. But then again, that's kind of, we would have to know more about exactly, you know, and then it would probably have to be a very minimal amount because it basically is focused on hard cost development.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
but counseling by itself is not eligible.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that question. And Rebecca, next up we have Robert, and then we do have one more question in the Q&A. So Robert, are you there?
Yes, and I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Super. I'm a veteran and I want to thank you for this program. My question is, what is the definition of rural, and how do I know if the veterans I serve fall in a community or an area that's considered rural?
Thank you for that question. And Samo, I will ask you to, because I think you covered that in the presentation. So if
I
you could
did,
just...
and I'm happy to cover it because it's so important. We will accept the definition of rural as determined by the Department of the USDA Department of Rural Development. And in our application, I think on page 5, in the required exhibits, we have a link. And Terry and we made sure this link works. We have a link there that will take you to the USDA website, and then you will enter the property address, and then it will generate a rural certification sheet if the project is in a rural area, or tell you that it's ineligible. And so when you're considering the properties to be served, that is going to be a very, very useful link. And then once you get that printout, please include it with your application if you already know the address of those veterans that you plan to serve. And if you haven't identified one, but you already know the county, maybe you can enter a county kind of address, and it may generate a map that shows that the whole county is rural. So whatever will work there, but we accept the rural definition as determined by the USDA Department of Agriculture, Rural Development.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We've got a question from Karen. She wants to know, what is the total amount of funds available? And so Karen, to answer that question, we don't have the total amount defined because what we are planning for this round, it's going to depend upon the demand for the program. And so if you have a project that falls within the parameters of what you've heard today and that matches up with the application, we want to encourage you to submit to submit those projects. We also want to remind you that we do have a little bit of flexibility around the maximum amounts stated. And so if you have a project that exceeds that maximum amount, we do encourage you to also submit those proposals as well. So Karen, I hope that answers the question. If not, again, please follow up with Anselmo and I via email. And if we need to jump on a quick call to discuss specifics, we are more than happy to do that. And then we have a final question today. We've gone over the time, and so we appreciate you guys for hanging in there with us. A final question from Sarah, who says that they provide free programs and services to veterans to include tiny home retreats and transitional housing. However, they define veterans differently than HAC. Will our incoming veterans need to fall under HAC's definition of a veteran? And so, Anselmo, do you want to address that, or should I go ahead, or you let me know?
I'm interested in your thoughts too, Terry. So let's both answer that.
All right. I'll go first. HAC is actually utilizing the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs definition of veterans. And so any individual to be served under the program would need to meet those specific qualifications as the Department of Veteran Affairs defines. And there are some additional stipulations around that active service component, such as those reservists or National Guard members who are called up to federal service and then injured or have a injury aggravated while in the line of service or training. But largely, we use the Department of Veterans Affairs definition of veterans, and that is that we strictly go by that definition. Anselmo?
I have nothing to add. Yeah, that was good.
All right. I think those are all the questions, all the hand raises that I see. Stephanie, our grand wizard behind the scene, am I missing anything?
I have posted a link to the PowerPoint, which is currently on HAC's website. It's the same page where you registered for the event. I also in the chat posted a link to the evaluation form. We would very much appreciate you responding to the evaluation. It's super short. We've shortened the form up the last several months. You'll also get it via email.
All right. All right. With that said, we want to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. Don't forget the applications are due on the 21st of this month at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And if you have questions that we need to answer before that, please reach out to us via email before the application due date. Once the application due date has passed, we will not be able to accept revisions to applications. And Selmo, did you have anything else to add before we close out?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today and giving us an opportunity to kind of get ahead of some of the questions and hopefully make it an easier process out
All
there.
right. All right, perfect. Last words. We want to thank our generous sponsor, the Home Depot Foundation, who has been really critical and a tremendous partner in HAC's ability of being able to serve veterans across rural America. And so with that said, thank you again to the Home Depot Foundation. Thanks again to each of you for the work that you're doing with rural veterans. And we look forward to seeing all of your good work in the form of proposals. And so we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.